supposed to be with things. Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
All right. Okay, I'm here with Gary Gauger, my dad and inventor of rims, and I wanted to put a little bit of this on camera and talk a little bit about what happened with you in the industry after you invented rims. And just to preface this, you know, you were a musician before you were ever in the music industry per se with a product.
Right.
And you invented rims to solve a problem on your own drum set.
Right.
And it kind of became a thing where you were almost forced into business when you created this thing.
Right.
And so what I'm curious to ask is, once you made it and people were encouraging you to offer it as a product or sell it and protect it, all that kind of stuff, what did you think was going to happen? What were your initial feelings about getting into this?
Well, it was something that gradually happened, and I had no intentions of really making this product other than solving the problem that was on this old Gretsch drum set that I had, that I basically was one of the last sets out of the Gretsch factory before they were sold. And a friend of mine had gotten one of the sets, and I just thought it sounded incredible. And the drummer's name was Jimmy Nelson, and a really wonderful drummer, was in the Marine band, and incidentally was the first drummer with the Brecker Brothers when they were in college. He was a great player, and he called me one day and said, "You got to hear this drum set." So I had, I think, a small Ludwig set or something. I went over to his place, and he had this great sounding Gretsch set, and I never heard drums sound like that. But what was interesting, he said, and I said, how are you holding them? There's nothing on the shell. Oh, he said, you don't want anything on the shell because it'll choke the drum out. I put them on stands, on snare stands. And the funny thing was, he said, they choke them too, but he said, I've got a way of fixing that. And he had surgical rubber tubing covering the triangle, and he set the drums of the triangle formed by the rubber tubing. And he says, this is the only way I can make them sound good. And he set them up. He had, I think, a 12 and maybe a 13 in the floor tom, and he hit them, and it just sounded incredible. And I've never heard drums like that. So I immediately got rid of the set that I had and ordered one of these drum sets, because he said they're going out of business. They've been sold. I think Baldwin Piano bought them or something at that time, and they were closing the Gretsch factory that was in New York. So I ordered it immediately, and I think I got it. And that's the set I still use today, and that I still use. Mel Lewis used it when he came up to Toronto. When I got out of the Airman a Note and moved to Toronto, and I started experimenting with ways of suspending the drum, because when I was playing back in the 80s, you were into this multiple tom setup. The Hal Blaine thing started to really take off in the 60s, and you just couldn't use snare stands all over the place for your drums. And I basically moved down here to work at a studio called Sound 80. It was a state-of-the-art studio, and I had been flying down and doing some recording work here, and I was working at a studio up in Toronto called Manta Sound. Great engineer up there by the name of Dave Green, and he always really liked the drum sound, and he knew I was working on different things to try to get the drums to sound better. And I had come up with a thing of pieces of wood with broomstick handles holding the drum by the rim from one side. And I still have the prototypes, and I thought, well, as long as I don't touch the shell, drum's going to sound great. And it did. It sounded good. I wouldn't say it sounded great, but I was able to get some of the sound back rather than the total choking sound. And when I got my set, I never had any mounts put on the shell. So my drums were all virgin shells without any type of mounting hardware other than the drum lugs and the tension rods and so on. So the thing is, after about 6 months, the drums started sounding not that great. And I remember Dave Green said to me when he says, did you change the drums? Because they sounded better the other time you were in here. And I said, yeah, I thought I was just hearing things, but they're not sounding as good as they did with my broom handle set up. So when I got home that day, I took them off and realized that it had actually bent the hoops out of round. It actually pulled the hoops from the weight of the drum. And I went, well, so much for this idea. That's not a good one. So, funny thing is, so many of the things you see today that the companies are coming up with are using systems that I experimented with back in 1973 and 74 that I found didn't work. But it took me a good 6, 7, 8 months to find this out. So I really did it step by step. Anyway, when I got here and I was working at Sound 80, I was still working on this thing, and I thought, I gotta come up with something better than this. These things that hold it from the tension rods or from the hoops or from two adjacent lugs, they just don't work. It seems to work, and it sounds a little better, but nothing sounds like bing, holding the drum up by 2 fingers and hitting that thing. Yeah. That was just the most beautiful sound because it was all bottom.
Right. And it blended the highs and lows.
And the highs and the blows,
yeah.
and yeah, I'll get into a little bit of that later, because drummers were going to thick heads and foam and muffling because what they're trying to do is get rid of the overtones.
Yeah.
And the overtones will be there when the drum is isolated and suspended properly. You just don't hear them. You hear the beautiful fundamental pitch of that drum. None of the drum companies understand this. They don't. They still haven't gotten it.
Okay.
Because
what I want to get into though here
okay.
is to talk a little bit about once you solved the problem, once you came up with what really did become the
right.
first rims mount.
Right.
What was the next step for you in terms of saying, I have to get this out there?
Okay. Well, here's the thing. I finally realized this didn't work, holding the drum from the side. So I'm still working on I've gone through 5 different ways of doing it over a period of 4 or 5 years. It's like 1978, and I'm working over at the studio. Finally, I thought, I'm looking at it, and I said to your sister one day, Jennifer, my daughter, I'm playing the drums, and I said, hold that drum up. So she picks the drum up by the side, and the drum, of course, is hanging over. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I can't play it that way. I said, hold it up so I can hit it. So she goes,
right.
like
naturally,
this.
Yeah.
Naturally. She goes and holds it, and then she tilts it, and I play it. And I thought,
that's how you have to hold it.
you gotta get it this way.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
give it went, a little hug.
That's right. It went bing, and I thought, I gotta hold it this way, because basically what I discovered, the thing is, when I developed it, it took me years to understand what I really developed, what I really did, and I did something so natural that what she did and what anybody would do, when you pick an object up, you don't pick it up so the weight is over here somewhere, you pick it up so that it's balanced. Essentially what you are doing, what you automatically are doing, you know that you must pick this up by its center of gravity. And then you, of course, you want to hold it as close to you so you're not extending it out here and creating a problem with your back. Anyway, I made this one up, and here's what's really interesting. I thought, I need to make something that goes around this way. I go down to my hardware store that's 2 blocks down the street, and I look for some steel that's 3/4 inches that extends halfway around the drum. They didn't have any. They had some thick pieces, but they had some aluminum. And I bought a couple pieces of aluminum, brought it back, filed it away, took some things to make the flanges, got some electrical grommets that they had down there. I had some bucks into this. I think I spent $6.30 that day, to make this first. So, and I attached just a basic bracket. I think it was just a simple little Ludwig bracket. That I like things that are simple. So I put that on, set it all up, hit the drum, and I went, holy crap, this is it. The drum sounds exactly like it does when I hold it up this way. So I made another one. I had a 10, 12, and I think I made the 14. And the set just was killing. So about a week later, I had a session over at Sound 80, and the main engineer at Sound 80 was a guy by the name of Tom Jung, who was very instrumental in having me do something like this. He was part owner of Sound 80 and eventually went on to have his own record label called DMP Records, Digital Music Products. And I'm in there one day, and we're doing this recording, and I would get there usually a half hour to 45 minutes before so he could set the mics up. And I'm behind these baffles, and I want to hear what they sound like. And he goes in there, and he's, after setting the mics up, he's not even looking at the drums, and he says, hit your 10-inch. Hit the 10-inch. No, hit your 10-inch. I said, that is the 10-inch. He said, no, that's your 12. I said, no, that's the 10-inch. Oh, okay. Then he says, okay, well, now hit your 12. I'm hitting the 12. No, that's your 14, isn't it? I said, no, that's the 12. and so on is carrying on. Finally, he comes out of the control booth. He says, wait a minute. He walks up to the baffles, and he says, why is this set, every drum set that has ever come in here, I'm adding bottom to. But you're playing these drums, they sound like they're 2 sizes larger, and I'm rolling the bottom off of them because they're starting to interfere with the bass drum. And I said, well, I'm working on this thing that holds the drum so it doesn't choke. And he looks at it and he said, that's unbelievable. I can't believe what that does to the drum. And I said, yeah, nothing touches the shell. It's something I've been working on. So I think a day or so later, he comes in, he said, could we use your set on another project? I said, yeah. He says, there's a drummer coming in. And then there was a guy across the hall that was doing a thing, working on a tune called Funky Town. That was done at Sound 80. And it got to the point they were all saying, could you leave your drums? Because everybody loves this drum sound. And I think about 3 months later, I'm packing up, and 2 of the guys come in there and they said, could you leave your drums? There's a guy coming in tonight, is a kid, his name is Roger Nelson. And I said, and one other guy said, don't call him Roger. Call him Prince. That's what he wants to go. I said, yeah, okay. So I left him there, and they started to be used on so many things that were in there. Some of the first demos, I think Prince had just been out of high school maybe a year and used them. So all these guys that were producing were asking to use this drum set. Mm-hmm. And Tom said to me one day, can you make these for our set? Now they had a Sonar Beechwood drum set in there. This sounded really incredible. And he said, can you make some for those so we're not tying your drum set up? I said, sure. So I'm hand making them in the garage. I got a small little torch and I'm brazing this stuff together, running them over to a place that does chrome plating and polishing. And I'm gradually getting calls from guys that have worked there and said, hey, I was over at Sound 80, played your drums. Can you make a set of those? What do you call those things? I said, they're just tom holders. Can you make a set of those for me? I said, yeah, you give me a week because I'm really busy. Because I'm playing 8 shows a week at a dinner theater, really great dinner theater nearby, and I'm doing jingles in the daytime, and I'm doing a couple of gigs on a Saturday usually, and Sunday. So I'm working full time and making a decent living at playing drums full time and doing occasional teaching. So I thought, man, I can't keep making these like this. I got to start finding something out. But in the meantime, Tom Jung said, have you talked to anybody about this thing? I said, well, I don't know what you mean. Well, could somebody rip this thing off? I said, well, I don't know, I guess so. He said, you should talk to a patent attorney. So he knew a patent attorney, put me in touch with him, and I went and we did a search on it. Nothing came up. And this is 1978. And I had started working on it in 74. Nothing came up in the search, and that took about 4 or 5 weeks because at that time all the searches had to be done by paper. And they went into the patent office and went through a whole bunch of things to pull out anything that was closely resembled it. So he said, I recommend you apply for a patent on it. Applied for the patent, got the patent without any problems. It was basically, they called it a ground floor patent because nothing came up against it. So we didn't have to change a lot of the claims. So then I thought, well, I don't know what to do with this. Remo was going to take it. Remo had seen a picture of it.
So was Remo the first company
Remo was the first. Remo
contacted you, or you contacted them?
Well, I had pictures of it, and I studied with a great teacher back in the East called Bill Shinstein, William J. Shinstein, who wrote a lot of the books on percussion at that time. He had a master's degree from Eastman School of Music, which at the time he went through it was the main percussion school. And I called him and I said, Bill, I got this patent. I don't know what to do with it. And he said, well, why don't you show it to Remo? And I said, well, okay. I said, I don't know him. He said, well, Fred Hoy, I write books with. Fred Hoy and I have written books. Fred owns part of Remo. And that's a real interesting story in itself. So, but he said, Fred plays drums, but he'll be at the NAMM show next week. Do you have any pictures? I said, I'll take some. Took some pictures, popped them in the mail, sent them to Bill. And Bill called me, he says, can I send these to him? Are you protected? I said, yeah, I'll write the patent number, and send it to you, and here you want to write it down. He said, okay, just so I know. I'm going to send him to Fred. So he sent him to Fred. In the meantime, I made a couple of calls to Remo to see, and I couldn't get through to him. Because, I mean, who am I? I guess she said, what business do you have? I said, well, I just wanted to talk to Mr. Belly about an invention I have. And I thought years later, I wonder how many people call Remo Belly or anybody drummer. I got this invention because
that we get that often. So
we get that. We get that quite often.
Sure.
So anyway, he didn't call me back, and the week goes by, and at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, the phone rings, and I wake up. I didn't get in, probably play until 1 o'clock in the morning. I pick the phone up, and hello. He says, Gary. I said, yeah. He said, this is Remo. I said, oh. I said, did you see the pictures? I saw the pictures. Fred Hoy showed them to me last night. He said, I think this is one of the best things that I've seen in all the years I've been doing this. He said, this is a real interesting invention. And I said, well, it really opens the drum up. He said, I can see how it works. I'd love to hear it. How soon can you come out here? So anyway, he flew me out to LA about a week later, and I was a little familiar with LA because we used to do a lot of recording out there with the Air on the Note. Anyway, go to North Hollywood and put it on the drum. He sits down, and Remo was a professional drummer, so he comes at this from being a drummer first, as a lot of guys do when they see this. He says, he sits down, he hits the drum, he said, yep, it solves the problem. And he said, let's go to dinner. So we went out to dinner that night. And he said, we get together. Louis comes over. Louis Belson was good friends with him. And he said, Irv Kotler and Mel when he was here. He said, all of these drummers, we get together and we talk about how can we improve the sound of drums. Well, I did what I could do, he said, with the plastic Mylar drum bed. We're always working on it, which he was. And he said, this is really something that's long overdue. And I said, well, I knew Shelly Mann said the exact same thing. And we went back to Remo's house, and he called Shelly. And I had a little conversation with Shelly. And I just said, you were really the inspiration for this. And he was very kind. He said, I'd love to see it. And I said, when I get this put together, Remo wants to do something. He said, well, that's great. Well, we had a deal all put together, and it took about 2 months, and suddenly Remo called me up one day and said, we can't do it. And I said, what? We agreed on something. And he was basically going to pay me $10,000 to license it and pay me a 6% royalty.
Okay.
He decided to pass on it. And I called Bill Shinstein. Bill Shinstein called Fred Hoy. Fred Hoy said, let me see what's going on here. So a couple hours later, Fred calls me and says, Gary, I'm really sorry about this, but Remo has a priority that he wants of a product that he wants to put out. He feels it's very revolutionary, and he wants to do your thing, but he doesn't think he could do it for another year or two. And I said, I got some bucks into this. I think I had the patent was $1,800. Now, when you're making $24,000 a year as a drummer back in 1980, that's a lot of money. And I got that into it. Plus, the patent attorney says to me, you have a year to file in other countries for protection. Uh-oh. Yeah. How much is that? Well, you're talking about another $2,000 maybe to file in Canada. And I'm going, oh my God. Here, I'm protecting this thing, figuring it's licensed, which it is not now. So, as it turns out, what Remo had decided was to put his money into a thing called PTS, pre-tuned system. And the funny thing was about it was a great idea, and we eventually used the PTS heads for the headset.
Right.
Only for about a year.
Right.
So, but the funny thing was, Remo said to me, we went over to the Frankfurt show one year, and we exhibited at his booth in 1985 when I had licensed the Pure Cushion, and he said to me something about when you develop products, you better know what you're doing. And he was just talking generally, and he said, because if you don't, you'll lose a lot of money like I did in PTS, like $1 million. So he lost $1 million in PTS, and I was amazed that he mentioned that.
Right.
But the thing is, I thought it was a good idea, but I don't think it was as good an idea as Rim's was, because I thought he would have been the perfect guy to do it, because he sold it for all drums.
Right.
And he was supplying, at that time, probably 90% of all the drum heads in the world. Bob Beals at Evans had probably about 10% of the market, 8%. Remo was basically the only guy. And the other thing about PTS was when he couldn't get the drum companies to take it, he decided to build drums himself. And everybody said, this is nuts. Why would you build a product that's going against your competition? Well, that allowed other drum companies to enter into it. So all of a sudden, Remo, I think, sort of shot himself in the foot a little bit. But anyway, now you have a lot of drum head manufacturers in here doing it. But the thing is, I ended up sitting there and I had this product I did not know what to do with. And
So what came after that? Who
well,
came next?
I had
I know
them on
you
my
dealt
drum,
with a lot of companies.
Right,
so.
and several of the players that were with Phil Woods, they were in town, and the drummer came over, and he played them, and he said, "Wow, this is amazing." And Steve Gilmore was a good friend of mine who was the bass player, and he said, "What are you going to do with this?" I said, "I don't know." Remo was going to take it, and he decided against it. He said, "You know who would love this? Is Russ Kunkel." And I said, "Do you know him?" He said, "Yeah, I lived in LA for a long time. My dad was I think a radio announcer out there." Anyway, I can't think of the drummer's name. I have to look it up. So anyway, he said, "You know what? I got my union book here. Here's his number. Give him a call." So Monday morning rolled around, and I think I called him at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and got him out of bed. He said hello, and I said, "Yeah, this is Gary Gauger, and you don't know me, but I've got this invention." And he says, "Okay, well, what does it do?" I said, "Well, this drummer from LA said that you'd probably be interested in it." Okay, so I started to explain it to him, and he said, "You know what? It's really early." I said, and I apologize for getting you out of bed. He said, "Can you send me some pictures? Here's my address." So I quickly wrote it down. Sent him a couple of pictures. And I think I sent him out right that day on Monday. I think he called me like Wednesday morning, at really early in the morning. And he said, "Gary, this is Russ Kunkel." I said, "Oh, did you get the picture?" "I got him, man. I just walked in from the mailbox." He said, "This is a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Can you make these for my drums?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." Yeah. So back out into the garage again, get the welding torch out. And I'm making them by hand. So I make a set for him. He's going out with, I think, Linda Ronstadt. And then he calls me a week later and said, "I'm doing a thing in New York. It's called Musicians United for the Safe Energy," or something like that. It was done at Radio City Music Hall, or one of the big arenas back in New York. And the Doobie Brothers were there, and all these other drummers. Jim Keltner played on, I think, with Bob Dylan or something. But all of a sudden, I get calls from these guys.
From them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Keltner wanted them, and then Jeff Porcaro, I happened to see him at a trade show, and he came up to me and said, "Man, I got to get these. I got to get these for my drums." And these guys don't have one set of drums.
Right.
I think over the period of a year, I probably made 5 or 6 sets for Russ Kunkel.
Mm-hmm.
And each time he was either going out with Jackson Brown or somebody like that. He'd have another set, and I'd hand make them, and I thought, man, I gotta find some way of doing this. I gotta get somebody to take this thing over.
Yeah.
Because I know it's valuable, and I know the drummers want it, and everything I was making was going to LA to the recording drummers, Harvey Mason and all these people, and I just thought, well, I've got a track record. I've got some names.
Some guys
I got the guys, so I'm gonna show it. Drum companies will eat it up.
Yeah.
They're gonna love it. Oh man!
Good
So Marv Dahlgren, who was the principal percussionist in the Minneapolis Orchestra, amazing percussionist who unfortunately passed away a little over a year ago, he would come by the house because he taught aerobatic flying down at Flying Cloud, which was only 6 miles from my house, and he'd stop by and I showed it to him. And I said, I want to show it to the drum company. I do clinics for Ludwig. He said, let me call Bill. So he knew Bill Ludwig Jr. So he calls me up a couple days later. Bill wants to see it. Can you come down next week? Yeah, Monday. So another friend of mine knew a guy named Larry Lincoln. And he said, Larry Lincoln's running Slingerland Drum Company, president of Slingerland. I went, whoa, okay. We got Slingerland and Ludwig in the same town. I'll see Slingerland in the morning and I'll see Ludwig in the afternoon. So I go down there, have this arrangement with Mr. Lincoln, Larry Lincoln, and I go into his office and he says, so
this is with Slingerland.
This is with Slingerland in the
Okay.
morning. I flew down there, got there about 10 o'clock, and he says, I go into his office, and he knew, went to school with a great trumpet player here named Steve Wright, and Steve actually set up the arrangement. And I go in there and I pull this thing out of my cymbal case, which is made for a 12 or a 13 inch, and it's one I handmade, and the side plate was welded onto the thing. I hadn't taken the plate off. I just made them, and they were very crude, but they looked good, you know, and they worked. So he said, what's that do? And I said, well, it really opens the drum up. And I
Did you say that, or did you say
well,
it makes the drum sound better?
No, I said it
makes
really
your drum
opens.
sound good.
I got it. Yeah, you got to get this right because
really- yeah.
I'm going to
It
show
really-
you, going to tell you something here that did not go well when I said that.
Okay.
Anyway, I take the thing out.
So it really opens the drum up.
It opens it. I
Yeah.
said it really gives it, and he said, you know, and I said, and here's what I said to him, and I want you to cue in on this because this is really important. I said to him, haven't you ever noticed the difference when you take the drum off and you hit it and you put it back on? I don't even finish the sentence and they go, whoa, 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 wait a minute. He says, I have my degree in clarinet. I have a master's degree in clarinet performance. And I looked over and it said, Slingerland Drum Company, Larry Lincoln, president. And I thought, it doesn't say, doesn't say LeBlanc or anything like that on it that would make clarinets.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, well, he doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And he
Makes
says,
sense.
let me get Bob in here. So he calls out into the shop and he said, I forget the guy's name, Bob, his last name. He says, Bob's been here for a long time. He was hired by Bud Slingerland. He'll know what you're talking about. So he comes in. Larry says, oh, I want Bob, take a look at this thing. This is Gary Gauger, and he's got this invention, and he says it really does something to the drums. Okay, what you got there? And I says, well, it fits on the drum, and I had made the plate for their diamond plate. I actually cut a plate with a jigsaw and had it look beautiful and fit their diamond plate. And he said, well, what's this thing do? And so I said to him, haven't you ever noticed that when you take your drum off and you hit it, and I didn't even get, he said, okay, wait, right there. He said, you got to understand, now, I don't know anything about music. I don't even own a record player. I just design them. And I've designed the hardware for Ludwig, or for Slingerland, for Slingerland, ever since Bud was here. Bud hired me, and I've been here, I think it was 20-some years. So right then and there, we put it on the drum, we hit it, and opens up. You stick it back on the thing, and it goes dead. He says, well...
On the shell mount.
On the shell mount.
Yeah.
And he says, well, now you're not allowing the rod to go into the drum. You're basically putting it on the end, and you're not allowing the rod to go through there into the drum. That's why it sounds better. I said, you know, with all due respect, that doesn't really have anything to do with it. I says, because I made a set of these for sonar drums that had a pipe. And I said, I lined the pipe up with the hole and had it go into there. And I says, fine. As long as nothing was touching the shell, that beechwood sonar set sounded great.
Yeah.
So he says, well, I don't know. There is a definite difference there, but I'm not sure of it, if your theory is right. Well, I knew it was right, and I wasn't going to sit there and say, well, you don't know what you're doing. I didn't say that. I tried to be respectful, because at that time I was 32 years old. He says, well, I don't know if there's anything we can do with this, but we got, all our dealers are coming in next week. Can you leave it here? I said, sure. I don't use that one, but you can leave it. And he says, yeah, we'll have them look at it. What I didn't know is that they were pretty much on their last legs, and I think they went bankrupt about a year later, or were sold a year later.
Okay.
So anyway, I get a cab over to Ludwig about 1 o'clock. Go up there, lady ushers me into, they were on Damon Avenue, ushers me into Bill Ludwig Jr.'s office. He comes in, introduces himself, and he says, well, before we go any further here, I need to understand that there's nothing between us. There's no set. You have protection on this. I don't want to look at it if I said, no, I got the patent. Yeah. Okay, well, sign this. I have a patent. I said, okay, so I signed it. So he wanted to keep things, because he said, we're working on things all the time. Right. And we could be working on something like this. I said, oh, right. Okay. So I pull it out of the cymbal case. The one that I had, I left the one for Slingerland that was for their hardware. I took one out there, put it on his desk, and he looks at it. He says, now what the heck is that? What's that going to do for my drums? And I said, it's going to make them sound better. Well, that was not a good phrase. He just about climbed across that desk, and he said, now just a minute, young man. You're going to sit there and tell me, do you know how long we've been in this business? I said, I understand, Mr. Ludwig. I said, well, let's say it makes the drum, opens the drum up, because I realized this was really an affront to him to say it would make his drum sound better, because as far as he was concerned, his drum sounded better than any other drums on the market. And I thought, and he said, we'll see about this. And he calls the secretary, get Al down here. So there was a guy working there that did a lot of research and development. His name was Al Lamert. And Al had been there for a while, and he came down, and he said, Al, this young man says this thing makes the drum sound, I don't know, somehow. It says it really improves it. Go upstairs and see what you think. Now, there's a little aside to this which is really important. We walked out into the warehouse, and the warehouse was huge. I mean, it was high. It looked like it took up a city block, and it was almost empty, other than some drum sets that looked like they were ready to be shipped out. And he said, he said, the drum business is really a strange business. He said, everybody wants to get into it, but they don't realize if you make drums, you lose money. And he said this, and this is something I found that was one of the truest things that he said. He walks over to a huge cardboard box. It's called a Gaylord. And he said, he reaches in, he pulls out a floor tom leg. He said, you see this? He says, we pay 20 cents a piece or something like that. It was under $1. We pay 20 cents a piece. We sell a set of these for $28. And he said, this is where we make our money. We don't make our money on drums. We lose money on drums. He said, the only reason we make drums is to sell our hardware. Right. And I thought, well, that's silly.
It's like their brand. It's like to get the name on.
Yeah. And he said, when the Beatle craze was in full function, he said, you see this warehouse? This was filled from top to bottom for 7 years. He said, 7 years, we had 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, making drums, 7 days a week for 7 years. He said, we swore there was a drum set in every household in the country. And then we were sending to Europe. So that was interesting. I mean, he was a very astute businessman, and obviously knew what the business was about. Anyway, I go upstairs with Al Lamert. Al pulls out a drum. Now he says, "Now what do you say this does?" I said, "It opens the drum up and you get the full frequencies of the drum." Really? I said, "Yeah, okay, well, let's try it." Put it on. So, of course, I didn't even say to him, "Haven't you ever noticed that when you take a drum and..."
Didn't go there.
I thought, I'm wearing this one out. So he takes the drum and I said, "Al, leave that one on the shell." And I said, "I've got your Ludwig mount on this one already because this is the one I use on my drum."
Yeah, so you could do an A/B test. So
Right.
you could switch to the shell mount and then to the rims mount
Right.
very quickly.
Right. Now this was a chrome drum that he had a thing which I don't like, and it wasn't a great sounding drum. But I put it on there and I hit it, thunk, you turn around, boom, and it's obviously sounds better.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like
The
holy.
drum wasn't rocking anyway.
The drum wasn't rocking great, but it did sound better. You could get bottom out of it. And Al says, "Wow, that's really amazing." And I said, and I'm thinking, he's going to say, "That's not that big a difference."
Right.
But I thought,
You've seen better.
He's hearing it, right? I've heard a lot better.
Yeah.
And especially on the Slingerland drum. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "It opens up." He said, "Boy, that's really, we'll have to show this to Bill." So we're talking. Half hour goes by, and it's like getting close to 3:30, and I gotta leave. The last plane leaves at 5, and it gets to be 3:30, 4:45. And I said, "Al, I gotta get going. I got a show to play tonight, and my last plane leaves at 5:00. He says, "Okay." He calls down. He said, I think that his secretary was Rose or something. He said, "Where's Bill?" She said, "Well, he's finishing up a meeting." Well, it got to be like 4:00, or maybe 10 after 4. And I said, "Man, I said, Al, I got to get going." So he said, "Okay, well, let's take him off." So I quickly took it off. We went downstairs. Just as we head downstairs, he's coming up the steps. And Al says, "Bill, he's got to get going." "Wait a minute, what do you mean he's got to get going? I want to hear this. What's it do?" And Al says, "It really makes a difference, and it has a lot of," and his exact words, "it's got a lot of merit, Bill." And Bill says, "Then I want to hear it. I want to see this from my," and he says, "Bill, he's got to get going. Just a minute here." And he gets really upset. And we go, he says, "You come down to my office." What the heck? We walk into his office, and he says, what's going on here? Why did you come down here to show me?" I said, "Bill," I said, "Mr. Ludwig," I said, "I thought it would only take a few minutes. I would love to show it to you, but," I said, "I have a show I got to play. It's 7:00. Okay, you come down here and you waste my whole day and you think I'm going to let you walk out of here like that?" And he's like really pissed. And 2 other guys come into his office and he says, "Okay, you can leave. The prototype stays here." And I said, "I can't do that." And he says, "You can leave. The prototype stays here." The 2 guys move away from the door and start moving towards the prototype that's in the chair. And I went, "Holy crap, this guy, they're not going to let me take my prototype."
Yeah.
Which I got to have. And I said, and Al Lamert was the one guy, he said, "Bill, he can come back." And he's trying to cool Bill out. Yeah. And he said, "Look," I said, "Mr. Ludwig, if I don't have that, I can't play the show. I'm playing a very important show. I can't." "Oh, well," and Al Lamert says, "Well, you can come back, can't you?" I said, "Absolutely, I can come back." And Ludwig said, "Well, we're going to take this. We're taking this." And I said, "Well, Mr. Ludwig, it's patented." He said, "Well, I got some high-priced lawyers down in Chicago." He said, "They'll probably tell me your patent ain't worth the paper it's written on." So he says, we're going to take this. We're going to put it into production." And I'm thinking, let me out of here.
Yeah.
And he finally says, "Okay." So Al Lamert says, "Bill, he can come back. Please, let's not push this any further." And
so how did you get your hands on your
I'm like this, and Al's talking him down, and he finally says, and I said, "Yeah," I said, I can come down next week." I said, any day." And he yells out to his secretary, he says, what's my schedule like next week? She said, well, you have all day Wednesday, Mr. Levy, you got, that's good. I said, I'll come down Wednesday. Okay, you make sure you're here. I want you down here next Wednesday then. Do you understand? I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And he said, okay, well, we'll take care of this. And he said, I've got to run out here. And he took off, and Al looked at me like, I'm sorry.
Was he like yelling at you?
He went, well, you know what he did? When we went into the office, there was a little office off from there, and there was a table and chairs there, and he walked in the office in front, and when he turned around, he said, you think you're leaving? You wasted my entire afternoon. He took the chair and he threw it across the room. I thought he was kidding, like, oh, you wasted my afternoon, you know,
Right.
but that's not nice. And
Right.
I thought, oh my God, this guy,
You're not kidding.
I thought, is this guy gonna hit me?
Yeah.
Because he was really like enraged that
Yeah.
this thing, he found out Al, and I could tell Al sort of knew how to handle him
Yeah.
and cool him down. And I sat down. I remember he left, the guys left, and Al said, I'm going upstairs. I got to take care of some business. And I sat down, and the secretary came in, and she looked at me, and I'm probably as white as a sheet. And she looks at me, she says, are you okay? Like, and I said, yes, could you call me a cab? And she said, yeah, I'll get you a cab, because it's like 1:15.
Yeah.
And she said, traffic, you better get going. What's your plane leave? I said, around 5:10. She said, you better get going because the traffic is getting really bad. And I said, thank you. So as soon as she called that, I said, can I go out? I said, I think, she said, would you rather wait outside? I'll wait outside.
I'd like to leave.
Yeah, so I want to get out. So I went out and I went down these steps and I got out on Damon Avenue, and I thought, holy crap.
Did you think I'm not coming
I
back
thought,
here next
I
week?
am not coming back. Well, the thing is, the next morning I called my patent attorney.
Yeah.
And I started to tell him what had happened.
Yeah.
And after about a minute of telling him what that Mr. Ludwig started to really get enraged, he said, wait a minute. He said, we have a recording machine here that takes depositions. And when I told the patent attorney that, he said Mr. Bill Ludwig said, we're gonna take it, see how long you last against me in a court of law.
Mm.
He said, that's when he said, okay, I want this, you gotta record this, you gotta give me the details, remember, give me the times, because if he threatened you that he was gonna take it, he said, then you're probably gonna be seeing him in a court.
Mm.
And I thought, wonderful.
Just what I
Wonderful,
wanted.
just what I want, you
Yeah.
know. And so anyway, we recorded everything I could remember, like going to Slingerland, the times I left, the fact that he said we're going to take it, and you know that he made threats like that. There were some other things he said too, which were really weird. But I just thought, and then my patent attorney says to me, "I don't know what you want to do with this." I said, well, I wanted to license it. I want somebody to take it off my hands. And I said, it's getting to the point I can't give the damn thing away. I got like this money into it. And he said, well, what he could do is if he comes out with it, it'll be known as a Ludwig product because he's got the advertising dollars. And if you come out with it later and you're fighting him on it, he said, it's going to be looking like you ripped him off. Because usually the first person to bring a product out, it's associated with their name.
Mm.
So he basically said to me, if anything you could do, I would put an ad out, give it the name you want to call it. And I don't even know if I came up with rims at that time.
Yeah.
But I thought, he said, you've got to get something out there that associates it with your name. So I called Modern Drummer and placed an ad, a $600 ad in Modern Drummer, a full-page ad that said, introducing this system, the rims, for the very first time. I didn't even have them. I was hand making them.
Yeah.
And I needed to make sure it got out there, so it was associated with Gauger Percussion, and the rim's name was associated with that. So I thought by that time, maybe I'll find somebody that'll take it, and nobody would take it.
Yeah.
I couldn't get anybody to take it. Other drum companies had heard about it, I called them. But the one thing I found out, and we can cover this later as time goes by, and Adam was with me on some of these meetings, I met with the drum companies later on, several of them, a couple of them twice. I went back to Ludwig probably about 6-7 years ago and met with him when a guy by the name of Jim Pfeiffer they had hired, and I had a meeting with them, and the people were in the room had no idea what I was showing them. I was showing them.
And they always talk about how they're not drummers.
I've
I've been in the room when that's happened, when someone says, I'm a guitar player, you know, and it's kind of uncanny. It's like amazing in some of the major companies, how they specifically
and well, Jim Pfeiffer was hired, he had been running Pearl, and they hired him at Ludwig, and the first thing he did is he talked to people in the industry. Ludwig needs innovation.
And he was an advocate for you.
He was an advocate. He called me at the trade show and said, "You don't know me, but I'm hired now to run Ludwig, and they really need some innovative products." I said, "I got them." He said, "Well, when can we get together?" He called me. I was up in Santa Barbara, and he called me. He says, "Why aren't you calling me back?" I said, "I haven't even returned from the show yet. The show was just ended 2 days ago."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, let's set up a time." So I went down to see him. And of course, again, I said to him, when we were talking about it, I said, "Jim, you know, what type of stuff do you use on your drums? Have you ever used it?" He says, "Look, I'm a guitar player. I don't play drums. I never played drums." But yet he was involved with Pearl, and now they were trying to run Ludwig to be the main guy at Ludwig. And I thought, but then we had a meeting with Tai E. We had 2 meetings with Tai E, and the gal that was head of Tai E came in, "Hello, how are you?" shook my hand, and out the door. And I think the one guy, I said, there were 3 people in the room, Adam was there, and I said, "How many are drummers?" And the one guy said, "I play at my church occasionally." So I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a hard sell. You know, so I got to the point, and after that last meeting at Tai E, that was before they closed up, and I thought Tai E would have been a great company, because they were, as one of the guys that worked there referred to Tai E as the moped of drums. And I thought, you know, the thing is, they were making all the hardware for a lot of the drum companies. Tai E was. So they were a company with deep pockets, and they had a huge booth at the show, and I thought this company could take products and really do something with them. So that's what I was looking for, but that never went anywhere. It was like, it just, you know, they're looking, they say they want innovation, but what they really want is a gimmick.
They want, a sales pitch with a language to it that they understand.
Right.
And they don't need to understand the product so much, they need to understand the marketing. That's
right. What these guys are great at is marketing. And when I say they know nothing about drums, I'm not exaggerating. They know nothing about drums, because the systems that they are putting out today, they just don't work. And we're sort of getting, Rims has got a sort of a second life, because we're selling systems now for Yamaha. We're selling to replace Mapex, because I look at these systems and I know they don't work. And I said to one of the guys at Mapex one day, they came out with that system that attached to 2 adjacent rods. And I was at a music store that had just gotten this Mapex set in, and he said, "Did you see the new Mapex suspension mat?" I said, "Yeah, I saw a picture of it." He said, "We got the set right in here." I said, "Oh, great." And I knew from just looking at it that it was one of the ways I had tried that didn't work. But I thought, I'm not going to say anything to him, because he'll just say, "Well, yeah, you would say that.
Of course
you'd say that, you know." So I went over to it, and I hit the drum, and it was tuned, and I took it off, that mount, hit it, it sounded pretty good. I went, "Wow, that's pretty good." Put it back on, hit it, and it lost probably 60, 70, it went dung. And I looked at the store owner, and he just went, "I don't even want to get into it." That's exactly what he said. "I don't even want to get into it," because he heard it. And I heard this from a lot of dealers. You put us in a very difficult position to sell your rims, because we're dealers for Pearl, we're dealers for Yamaha, we're dealers for Tama, and then we sell a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 drum set, and then say to the person, "Now, if you really want them to sound good, put these things on that this guy makes in his garage up in Minneapolis." You know, so when you see these drum companies that have the Lab series, don't you picture the guys with white coats walking around in the lab, this laboratory where they're coming up with ideas. Well, we have our lab too. And I don't let anybody wear white coats, because I see somebody coming at me with a white coat, man, I'm running the other way. we have our laboratory is basically a 2-car garage. So
it was good enough to build a helicopter in.
Good enough to build. I built a experimental helicopter in which I flew for 8
when you
years.
needed a break from the drum.
When I
industry
needed
for
a
little
break
while.
from percussion,
I'll work on the helicopter.
they said we don't need you around, and I said good, goodbye.
Well, that's probably a good point. I think we'll get into some of the other companies you went to, and then obviously get into some of the percussion days in maybe another interview. And start talking
that's
a little bit more about some of this stuff. That's
really interesting, because there was, although percussion was a bit of a 11-year nightmare, there were some really excellent things about it that I could not have done without a gentleman that was there that I learned more from than anybody other than Bill Shinstein, my teacher, a guy named Arnie Ryan. And I want to tell you about that, because to me, I thought it was the exact balance.
I just want to make sure that this is still okay. It is still going.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so yes.
It was the exact, what I want to cover, it was the exact balance of having a person who knew all of the manufacturing processes with somebody that knew how something had to work. And he basically said to me, you tell me how it needs to work, and I'll design it that it works the way you say it should work. And that was absolute perfection. And we can talk about that later on. But that's so important, because no company that I see does that.
Yeah.
And that's why we finally, when Adam and I left Tyee that last time, I just said, no more. I'm not dealing with these companies anymore. I had a license with Mapex, and they destroyed, there was an angular hi-hat, and they didn't manufacture it anywhere close to the way I had instructed it to be manufactured. And they sold a ton of them, and they all came back, and it was because they didn't make it as I had developed it. And I've got one that I've used now for 11 or 12 years, and it works wonderful, and it changes angles. And anyway, that's we'll get that in the next one. And anyway, I hope you find that interesting.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. There you go. Thanks.
You're welcome.